Hi, I'm Lipisaka. Welcome to Business Transformation and Integration series. I am a business transformation and integration specialist, consultant, published author, and a researcher. I run business transformation podcast series every month, and welcome to May episode of Business Transformation. May is also the Awareness Month of Mental Health. So, in today's episode, we will discuss the importance of our health, but through our mindset, through our activities, and how these are linked to business transformation and business improvements. Today, I have got my guest, Hilary Brigs, and she is an award winning speaker, business consultant, and a champion triathlete. I'm delighted to have her as a guest today. A little bit about Hilary. She has held many positions in her career as operations director, as associate partner. She has completed her master's in engineering from University of Cambridge and MSc in manufacturing from University of Warwick. Welcome, Hilary.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
Very welcome. So we will talk about, your experience and your ways of working in the business world. So you have contributed in many different ways. So let's start with what led you to do the triathlons?
With that, I only started in 2016, and at the time I was cycling about 35-kilometer round trip to work, which is perhaps more than a lot of people would do, but I was doing that, and swimming. And I remember hearing about triathlons, and I love challenges. So I was thinking Ironman. I thought, yeah, I can do this. Thank goodness I didn't start with that. But I thought I just needed to get my running going again. And I entered a couple of sprint events in 2016. So that was how I got started, just do it.
That's a brilliant. People take on like one activities, and you started with 3 different activities within triathlon. So is there anything that inspired you to go with triathlon and try out all 3 different activities at the same time?
Yeah, I think originally, I've always been quite a keen fitness. So I've done long distance walks and cycling just to get around. And I'd not done it for quite a while, but it was actually getting involved with a startup renewable energy company. I thought, actually, I need to get back to cycling. So, there's funny how things come together. Absolutely. And it takes you forward. And I'd also had been training for a long distance charity walk for the Wales Air Ambulance, it was 200 miles in 8 days, but at quite a fast pace. So I was doing a lot of training at the time. And I started not only doing cycling and walking and running to work, but also swimming, just to sort of keep my overall fitness. Mm-hmm. And I realized, I'd heard of triathlon. I thought, this is really good. You can be working on different parts of the body to be building your fitness without wearing out and using certain parts. So I kind of got the concept, but it's funny how things come together. But when I started, I had no great ambitions with it. It was, a joke to myself was finish and don't be last. That was the scope of my goals. So
that's a great way to remember.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So in terms of triathlon, and you have been doing all these activities, so tell us a little bit about what are the key learnings from triathlon? And it's massive going on, and in between you have to prepare yourself, prepare your health, prepare your mindset. I think talk about us in terms of what leads to one thing to another thing, which is more important in this whole aspect.
I think, the journey with triathlon, so I'd done a couple of sprint events, and I was gearing up to do the next distance, the Olympic distance or standard distance in 2017, when I had a stupid fall off the bike. It was my fault. And I ended up completely wrecking my Achilles. Now, I damaged it playing tennis many, many years before, but I wrecked it so comprehensively, they actually had to replace it with another tendon. So it was a big job. And I think that was, as ever, sometimes when you're faced with an adversity, that really put me on the spot, because I was worried that I might not be able to walk again properly, let alone do triathlon. So I took whatever the physio told me to do, once I'd come through the operation and was about to come out of the boot, I took it very seriously. So I made lots of copious notes from every session with a physio, and I did the exercises religiously. And, ultimately it was 18 months before I was able to get back to running and cycling. But I think that raised my whole discipline. I thought I was fairly disciplined, and I carried on with the exercises, did get back to triathlon. And cut a long story short, 2019, I came first in my age group in a couple of events and was completely amazed. Carried on doing the exercises, then had to get more training as I was sort of, perhaps getting injuries, risk in my other leg because it was doing more work. And 2021, I qualified for Team GB age group team, competed last year and got on the podium, both in the European and the World Championship. I'm off to Madrid in just over a week's time for this year's European Championship. So I'm absolutely amazed at what I've been able to do. But I think the key learning for me is when you focus on something, it's just amazing what you can achieve. And I suppose it's a journey as well. So like I said, when I started, my goal, I didn't even know about Team GB age group and all this stuff. So I just started where I was. But I suppose I am quite competitive, I'll admit to that. And
I was just about to say that while you're saying it seems like quite natural flowing, but it needs a strong mindset because you're talking about, different age group at a different stage of life, and then the discipline that you have to go through. Yes, one physiotherapy, writing down notes, but actually manifesting it and executing it, that really needs a lot of discipline, strong mindset. And you talked about intention and focus, that all plays together. So all toolkits bring it along together so that you can start going into that journey.
Yeah, I think, I reflect on this because I've actually been working with an expert in, let's say, tacit knowledge. So expertise, how do you extract expertise? And we've been looking at what was the process and the mental strategies that's taken me from, I would say, low-grade amateur to podium level at the World Championships. And I think he's also done lots of research. He's on his second PhD in this sort of area. And he's found so many quotes on the internet, which I think whatever I say, it's been said before in one form or another. It's out there in the internet. And I think the difference is, so what is it that you need to do to actually implement? Like you say, discipline is one thing, but actually, for me, it starts with a motivation, and that might be something that you strongly want to achieve or something actually you're trying to go away from. So for me, probably the situation when I'd had the injury, my fear was that I might not walk again. So that provided me, or at least not properly, that provided me with the motivation to do whatever the physio told me. Now it's going to be different for everybody, but I think starting out, having that motivation, knowing where to start. So I had a list of exercises, and with the triathlon, I now work with specialist coaches in each of the disciplines. I know, I listen to them because I could get to a certain level on my own, but to go beyond that, again, it's a learning, it's finding and seeking out the people who can help you get to that next level. And then you've got to approach with an open mind and just let go of whatever baggage you've got, do it. And I think the thing I love with sport is that it's fairly easy to measure your progress, whether it's time, power levels, whatever, you can see progress fairly quickly. And that, I think, then is the important thing, that because that keeps the motivation going when you see you're making progress. When you're not making progress, I guess that's that can be a frustration. But
so it's also to define, what you're saying is to define the progress and to keep measuring the progress. And I was thinking about, in the business world, we always talk about Kaizen as change for better. Now, in terms of Kaizen or in the business transformation, I have written a book about it, and it's about the 5 elements we talk about. One is about engagement. The second is about process and improvement, what kind of improvements you are doing in your processes, or innovation, having that mindset of innovation. Then there is data and analytics, where you have touched upon, how you are keeping on measuring the success or measuring the progress.
Yeah.
So it's all about the data, and what are you using that data for? Are you helping yourself to go beyond a level beyond, keeping track of that progress? And then we'll touch upon the culture, business culture, and how does it play part. So tell me about, what are the key learnings from your triathlon you would like to implement in business world?
Yeah, I think for in relation to business, I think it's been very specific about what is it that you want to get good at.
Yeah.
Because I think often in business it's a bit too woolly. The problem definition isn't clear enough. You're going to be spread too thin. And it's also recognizing, and I've had experience of this, where there are so many things that are wrong or need to be corrected. It's almost accepting that some of the things is going to be a mess or a bit of mayhem, but picking on one area, you think, okay, I'm going to concentrate the improvement effort on this piece and at least get some progress. So as years ago as a production manager, I came up with a mantra: 5 minutes a day doing something to make tomorrow better, and accepting there might be some days when that wouldn't happen. But tomorrow's another day. Pick yourself up, go again. So I think it's being able to break things down and at least concentrate on doing improving on one thing. I'm thinking, it's the measurable progress, and I think it's having, probably as a team, and the measures. What I come, so I've worked and put in ISO 9001 quality management systems in a few companies, and I think what is always quite hard, and some people avoid having measures on their progress, and that probably you mentioned about culture, and I think for some organizations, some people, there's a fear of being measured, because if it's not where you want, then it might be used against you. And so I think having that openness, and it's also being able to accept if things aren't improving. I mean, what I do with the sport, say last year I was a bit disappointed with my swimming, because I'd kind of plateaued. I wasn't working on it, but it made me look again. And when I got videos of me swimming, it's like, okay, I thought I was doing things not perfectly, but when I looked at the videos, it's like, no, I've got a lot to improve. And also it's millimeter perfection. So if you imagine the resistance of water, if you ever try walking through a swimming pool, it's hard work. So I mean, any little bit that's out of line or not quite right, that's going to be resistance. It's going to slow you down. So I think I take it can be frustrating if I'm not making the progress I want, but it's actually a prompt to review. And it's the classic line: if you do the same, you get the same. And I think with sport, I've always found you will come to some point where you plateau, and then you've got to look, if you want to go beyond, you need to look at, okay, what else? And that's where coaches and real experts come in.
Absolutely. And that's very interesting. You pointed about, and we come across this resistance. Yes, in swimming, it's the water, it's your body. It's about if you're doing that in the swimming pool, that's one thing. If you're doing it outside, that's different. So obviously the challenge, the resistance comes across from, and how you are geared up in terms of taking all different type of resistance. Now, in the business culture, the resistance is another big thing in terms of, yes, you would like to progress, but how much you are progressing based on the resistance you're having for any kind of change. And it's also about communicating what you are doing with the resistance that you're having in the day-to-day life. And the millimeter progress that you mentioned is so classic, because again, in business culture and change, sometimes you would not be able to see the change quite significantly unless you have gone through that plateau. And then obviously a drastic shift, either up or downward, because in change, sometimes people go through absorbing all the kind of reality, and then they move upward. So I see it's a kind of a very good example of being in plateau while in the triathlon, and then coming into, understanding how you can resist that change. So do you want to give an example from the business side, and your how you came across this kind of challenge, or if you have come across the resistance that you have taken forward?
Yeah, I think one of the one example more recently comes to mind. I was managing director of a fairly niche technology company that was going through sale to a Japanese company, and I was responsible for handling all of the due diligence requests. And actually, it was just a mountain of work. And yeah, it was a limited number of people who could be involved in it from the company, just because of confidentiality and so
Yeah.
on. And yeah, certainly one of them wasn't really in favor of doing things. So actually I ended up, to the situation, taking on more. But I think that's where I brought in my 5 minutes a day type attitude, or just do one thing
Yeah.
and concentrate. And I suppose all the time it's applying the focus. If you got one question, and there were areas that I wasn't an expert in, whether it was some aspects of law or property,
Mhm.
and it was just keep drilling down. And so there must be somebody that knows the answer to this, or where to find the answer. So again, I guess it's having that persistence
Yeah.
and not giving up. So yeah, I think excuse management is another phrase I use, that whatever people come up with is kind
Mhm.
of asking the questions, or put them in a position that there's no way, there's no other way but going forward. And if they won't,
Yeah.
then find someone who else who can.
Okay.
I guess I'm thinking another example from earlier in my career, when I'd taken on it was a new role, logistics director, within part of the Rover Group, car industry. And again, it was a situation where the existing ways things were being done weren't
Mhm.
going to cut it with what we needed to do. We were working very closely with Honda. All of the supply lines needed to be changed, the ordering
Mhm.
patterns of the components and so on. And again, I suppose it was finding the people who got it,
Yeah.
and working with the people who could see what needed to happen, letting the other things carry on, but say might not be ideal, but you
Yeah.
can't fight on all the fronts. So it's kind of concentrating the attention, getting the new way going, and then bit by bit, you migrate it, and other people then either do come on board, or in worst case they go. And
Mhm.
that's, I think, if there are tough situations, one of the things that I've learned is, ultimately you've got to think of the overall good. So in any, in an organization context, if somebody needs to be I don't know, made redundant, fired, or whatever, I'm thinking about the overall, what's best for the organization, for stakeholders,
Yeah.
and so on. And if that means bad news for some people, so be it. And I've been on both sides of it myself, so
Yeah.
perhaps I've been a problem at some points as well.
It's about the
um
organization vision. I mean, ultimately, any kind of transformation would have different kind of aspect and the knock-on impact from one business to another. But
yeah
it's also about understanding what is the vision and what is the overall growth objective that the organization is trying to achieve. And to achieve that, yes, you need to, as a business growth expert, you would have to deal with it in a certain way that is good for the overall organization and the
yeah
stakeholders, and the business turnover, profit, and everything comes across to related to it. So what's happening now, Hilary? And I know you are doing a lot of, you are an award-winning speaker, so you do a lot of talks, and you are also running sessions about improvement beyond expectation. So tell
yeah
us more about what is improvement beyond expectation.
Yeah, so it's come from looking at how I've gone from, say, low grade amateur in the triathlon to bronze medal in the World Championships. And it it really, the key elements that I've run 3 hour workshops on this to help people. It's not about doing triathlon. It's about, if you want to get really good and say improve beyond what you possibly
Mhm.
thought
Yeah.
would be okay. Uh, the first thing is, why are you doing this? So Simon Sinek, doesn't he, talks about find your why. It's easy to say that, but it's actually
Yeah.
thinking, what is it that's important to me about this? And I think what I've noticed with the triathlon, I say I didn't start with some grand vision of it. So I think that's something, sometimes people feel they must have some grand vision, and for some people that might work. But for me, I just let it evolve. And
Right.
as I was making progress, then it's become more and more important. So I think how you get to it might be different. And actually, it's self-learning, what works for you.
That's
Look at
true.
other things that
Yeah.
you've done. And
And
I
every
think,
family is different and every challenges are different. So you have to work out on your why and also thinking about what works for you. So well
yeah,
said.
and it can evolve. So I think be open. But what seems to be, and working with this Dr. Max Herald, the Dutch guy that I mentioned, a real expert in tacit knowledge, he's worked with a lot of Olympians and top business people. I think it will be different for everybody, but there's a number of things that are coming together. So say for me with the triathlon, it was actually the situation. Yeah, I like challenges, and things started to fit together, and then you build on it. So I think if you haven't got a big why at the
Yeah.
moment, don't despair, but be open. I think openness and curiosity is probably key factors. I think then it's actually starting and figuring out, sometimes if there are lots and lots of things to do, actually picking one thing. And unless, I always go with them thinking that unless something is potentially life threatening, it's just do it and see what happens. So for me with the triathlon, I realized I needed a wetsuit, I needed a tri suit, which is like swimming costume with bike shorts, really. That was the only equipment I needed. I'd got a bike. It wasn't a proper road bike, but it was going to be good enough to get me round.
Yeah.
So I kept things as simple as possible and entered an event and figured out what happened. Now, the swim was much more difficult than I expected. So that was feedback in terms of, okay, I need to do more work here. And that's, I think you mentioned with Kaizen is about measuring the progress. I think once you've started, that will give you feedback and information in terms of how well you're doing or what more you need to do and go again. So it becomes it's a
A
virtuous
regular
circle that
daily
you're looking to
approach
do.
in terms of measuring it through the
Yeah,
data that you have in hand,
yeah,
right? So
yeah. And I think that's, I mean, one of the probably the breakthroughs on the bike was getting power meter pedals, so that, and I'm actually getting the data in front of me as I'm
yeah,
pedaling, and actually in real time to experience what good feels like. So
sure.
actually the pedaling efficiency, because I think it's for that it's getting the muscle memory and locking into, okay, this is what good feels like, this is not so good. So you can do more of the good. And I think any
And what does it
situation where you
do
can
with the
start.
mindset when you are measuring the data, when you are looking into the data that you have got in hand? What does it do in terms of your mindset before you started? So, Hilary, before you have started the triathlon, and once you have gone through the journey of, let's say, being in the plateau, but at least you're still progressing during that journey, through that journey, you have done quite a lot. What does
Yeah,
it do to your mindset? You feel more strong, more confident? What else do you do?
yeah. I think what I find, coming up to a race, there's going to be some nerves to an extent, but what
Yeah.
I see is actually I'm pretty consistent in my times. So if I'm doing other training events and shorter distances, I've got a pretty good idea on
Yeah.
what I ought to be capable of. Every course is going to be different. I mean, I did a race at the weekend. The run was all on grass and a lot of grass clipping, so my run time wasn't brilliant. But it's the same conditions for everyone. But I think, always taking from that, seeing how you do against other competitors, to think, right, okay, actually I can still do better here, and
Yeah.
then work with coaches to look at, okay, how can we keep improving.
Great. Yeah. And in terms of data and analytics, nowadays we are also talking about artificial intelligence, where you can Internet of Devices. So a lot of things, and we talk about in the technology aspect in the business transformation. That's another area. Obviously, there are a lot of shift in the technology now. It's about cloud technology, scalability, agility. You can think about Internet devices and IoT, lots of different things that you can measure your regular efficiencies, and there are different platforms and tools. But it's at the end of the day, I think it brings all together when we have the right mindset, when we are measuring the right data, when we are looking at the right data, and we are shaping up where what is the end goal that we want to achieve, and go through that roadmap of our journey, whether it's a personal journey or it's a business transformation. I think it's quite a lot of synergy in between between that
Definitely.
kind of thinking.
Yeah. I think one of the things I would caution against is it's easy to get lost
Yeah.
in all of the data. So, and you say more and more things, it's being selective, and
Mhm.
what is right at one point may change at another point. But certainly from the sports point of view, I find the real time data. So I actually, having had this experience with a bike, I went out and I found there was similar gadget for measuring power for running. So I have that when I'm training, I can actually see the power that I'm putting out running. And swimming, I've got goggles that have got a head-up display that I can actually
Oh,
see length
okay.
by length, what's going on. Now it's not going to be ideal for all people, but
Sure.
that I found it's useful to get that feedback in the moment. And actually with some of the swimming coaches, they'll have like you're wearing a headset, so they're able to tell you while you're swimming, do
Uh-huh.
more of this, do less of that, rather than wait till the end of the length. So you're getting, I think the closer, in its general principle, is the closer you can get the feedback to what's actually happening, the more likely you are to make change.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the feedback loop is also very important in any kind of transformation. So what is happening, get the feedback loop. And if you have to change the course, or if you have to change the roadmap, then change the roadmap, and that makes it more efficient.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think the other thing I would say, and you mentioned at the start about sort of mental health and so on. One
Mhm.
of the topics that I speak on is overcome overwhelm, and in my early career, particularly in production management, I mean, it was unbelievably stressful, and colleagues were panic attacks, and I got a little backache at some point, and I realised that was my body telling me I was
Yeah.
pushing too hard. And I think we've all got a finite level at what we can perform until you hit the fatigue point,
Yeah.
and then the body starts to complain. And I advocate most important to people is to know and listen to your body, because if the body's starting to come up with complaints, and I think whether I got shingles at one point as well, I absolutely want to make sure that
Uh-huh.
always know what that looked, and that was because my immune system was down.
Mhm.
I'd come through this Achilles operation and I was under a lot of pressure and so on, and I probably was just thought, yeah, I can keep going. So I think listening to the body and being able to set the priorities and reset,
Mhm.
if things are getting too much, is get back in control, regain control, and then in parallel build your resilience. So whether that's physically or mentally, doing stuff in safe situations
Mhm.
to put yourself under pressure where it's not going to be the end of the world if you screw up.
Sure.
I think that sort of thing. And I do the same with the sport. So I'll swim in
Mhm.
harsher conditions, because I find the swimming in particular is the challenge for me. So I think it's yeah, if you're overwhelmed and your head's kind of full of, I don't know, worries and concerns,
Uh-huh.
you're never going to get to your
Never get
best.
to.
So that's number one to me, is be able to be calm and
Mhm.
regain that calmness, because I think overwhelm of some sort is inevitable. If you're engaging with the real world, there's always going to be stuff doesn't arrive in a handy sequence, in my experience at least. So
Or in a handy manual. Sorry, about you mentioned about listening to body. Sometimes people are under so much of pressure. It's about listening to body is one thing, and acknowledging it is a different thing, and then restart. But sometimes people don't even are not even aware that something is happening within the body, right?
yeah,
So it's to be aware of the fact that something is happening, some red flags are coming up, and
yeah,
how can you change or what attention, and you have rightly said about setting the priorities.
Yeah.
And it's so important and pertinent in terms of understanding what is happening to you on a daily basis. Give some time to yourself to
Yeah, it's
understand.
it's easy to say, and I think, the basics, like getting enough sleep, eating well, not
Yeah.
drinking too much. I mean, these are things that we all know, and it's very easy to get in bad habits.
Mm.
But I think my experience is that if you ignore the things, or you don't even notice, the
Mhm.
body will keep telling you things, and it dials it up. And so ultimately you're going to get more serious issues. And I suppose ultimately, people have burnouts and
Yeah.
breakdowns and so on, and that's, it's real shame, not only for them, their families, but for an organization as well, because it's, it can take a long time for people to come back, and they
Yeah.
may, have left the organization, and maybe they weren't right for the role. But
Mhm.
actually, I think that's where a responsibility as a leader, you need to be having some attention on people, that if they're showing signs, you need to do something about it. So but I think the more we can take responsibility for ourselves, it's critical, because it's, yeah, if you start messing around with your body and getting sick for whatever reason, it's not helpful.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I have to find the stats there. I haven't got that stats in front of me. But during pandemic, before pandemic and a post pandemic, I think people are usually more aware of mental health and looking at things. And I was looking at the other day, many women, senior women, have left a job just because of the fact that they have realized that about the mental health and taking care of change and perspective in
Yeah.
their personal life as well. So yeah, it's very important to look at
I
ourselves.
Yeah, and I think, you've been talking about change management. Again, I would take a parallel from sport in terms of fitness level.
Hmm.
So that I know the fitter and stronger I am, the faster I'm able to go, and the endurance will be longer. So I think change management, it's easy for people at the top of the organization. Perhaps they're used to change, and they can think, right, okay, we should be going faster. So
Hmm.
it's a bit like if you've got a pack of people running, that the people at the front saying, right, come on, let's up the pace. Well, if the
Yeah.
people at the back aren't fit enough at that time, it's most unhelpful, actually. If you start pushing people to run
Hmm.
faster than is sustainable, they're
Yeah.
going to collapse at some point. And that's, if your job is to get everyone over the line in a
Yeah.
similar point of view, that's, spreading out and kind of turning over the head over shoulder and shouting at people to hurry up,
Yeah.
it's just not
It
helpful.
doesn't work.
Because actually, kind of building that fitness sustainable pace
Hmm.
is what's important. So I think with change, making sure that people are going through a certain amount of change all the time, so people
Yeah.
are used to changing, is an important factor.
Otherwise, it will become a change fatigue, and people will be easily gone into. We also talk about the user adoption and the change fatigue. So there are a lot of factors that need to be taken care of. That not too much of change, and with technology it could be so many different ways you can overwhelm
Yeah,
an organization or business. But again, how much change fatigue would that be? So you have to balance it against the flashiness, jazziness of having it all, compared
yeah,
to what the organization can adopt
yeah,
at a certain period of time.
yeah,
So that's where the roadmap and everything comes into play as well.
yeah.
So
And,
balancing
and I
that.
And I think it is important. What my sense of what's happening actually with the pandemic is that people have been dealing with a whole lot of other things in their personal lives as well. So, a person is a person. You can be dealing with certain stuff in work and do your best to compartmentalize. But at the end of the day, if you're dealing with the fact, I don't know, you're struggling with long COVID, or have got, at least some aspects of that.
Yeah.
You might have had bereavements. There's just a lot of other things going on that is sort of, it's taking up mental
Yeah. With
bandwidth,
space.
if you
Yeah.
like. And I think it's at least, again, as a leader, being mindful that people are dealing with other things. And so it's being, when you're thinking about this, what's the sustainable pace that we can maintain. It's taking all these factors into account and helping people through.
Absolutely. One last point I would like to touch upon, because we have been talking about culture, talking about change. Also, different culture people has got a different driver to play. So, and again, you have traveled quite a lot in your career span and also currently. So, what kind of interactions and what are the different perspectives can you bring in, and you think about the culture plays into the business transformation?
Yeah, so I've lived and worked in Italy and Germany, and I've worked closely with Americans, Japanese, and so on. So I've covered working
Mhm.
with a variety of cultures. I think it's one very practical thing. If you are dealing in a foreign language, so certainly when I was in Germany, I was operating in German most of the time, and
Okay.
that in itself is talking in your second or third language is hard work, and so it's a mental effort beyond that. But I even found in Italy that most of the time at work I was working in English, but most of the people I was working with were English was at best their second language, so I was having to compress my English, but again also paying more attention to do I sense people are understanding or not. So I think so it's a very simple level. I think probably a lot of British people, I would say, we're not renowned for our linguistic skills, let me put it that way. And I think unless you've experienced that frustration of trying to express yourself in a different language, it's perhaps hard to understand just what's going on for other people. So I think there's a fairly basic thing there about actually just being mindful that people's communication, they're perhaps having to work a lot harder than you are. I think it's also, I remember, some nationalities they can, and again, it may be just the linguistic skills aren't there, and I probably don't come across as polite in French or Italian or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's easy if you're on the receiving end to take it personally and think, oh, they're a bit abrupt or whatever. And so I think being open to and not taking things personally. So people might do things in a very different way. It's like, oh, that's it. Like getting curious. I think we mentioned that before. I think, oh, that's it. That's interesting, and not sort of overreacting to
It's
things.
also about perceiving what we are saying and how people perceive. So some time back, I've seen that in a scale of like from west to east, people perceive it in a different way.
Yeah.
And even in business, if you look at east versus west, there are like more personal relationship compared to business relationship, and they do business. And you mentioned about Japanese culture. I'm sure there are many insights around that, where people do business, where there is a personal relationship and they would like to do it in that way. Whereas more in the West side, it's more about business and personal relationship are kept separate. So
Mm.
it's also about perceiving and how we are perceiving the knowledge, perceiving what we are hearing. So that also plays a lot of part in it.
Yeah, I think doing certainly before I went to Germany, and also working with the Japanese. I'd worked early on in my career when we were at Rover. We worked very closely with Honda, so I'd experienced that. I think it's doing a bit of research and reading, just
Uh-huh.
to be aware and have that again mindset of, okay, things are different, and it's not one's right, one's wrong. It's just different. So. Don't be surprised. And I say it perhaps it encourages one to let go of what one might think of right or wrong. It's just, okay, that's how you're used to doing things, and other ways are different. So I think taken in the right way, it can be very empowering in terms of, oh, there's a different way of doing things. So if that's different, what else could be different? If you turn it the right way, you can actually open up new possibilities. And I guess that's the innovation. I think working with different cultures, different beliefs, it can be very, very powerful.
I can carry on with this conversation. I think I'm really enjoying this conversation, but we're running out of time. So I'd like to, if you have, are you having any upcoming sessions for improvement beyond expectation? If anybody listening to this series would like to reach out to you.
If probably the best thing is to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Hilary Briggs. You'll see me as a consultant, speaker and triathlete, and I will be posting about upcoming events. I haven't got anything planned at the moment, but I'm hoping perhaps in another 2 or 3 months we'll be running another 3-hour session, probably central London, some of the Institute of Directors or somewhere like that. And really, it's if you've got some challenge, whether it's business related or it could be a personal thing, but there's something you think, I really want to make a breakthrough on that, that would be great to hear from you. And I think with the right approach, really improvements beyond what your wildest dreams are possible. And that's my biggest takeaway from triathlon. Having achieved what I've done, I thought, wow, if I can do that in that sphere, what else could I do? And so that I inspire myself through that as well. So
thank you for your inspiring conversation. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I will be posting it again in LinkedIn. We have the recording done. It's a live session. I didn't see any kind of questions coming up, but if there are any questions from anybody watching the series, please reach out to Hilary, or if you have any questions around business transformation, reach out to me. Happy to help you. Thank you again. Thanks a lot, Hilary. And hopefully we will do more series like that.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.